Hey everybody, welcome to From the Hangar podcast. This is the 18th episode. I am your host, Lem Malabuyo, and I'm sitting here with Ruth and Stephen Hale, who are, well, I'm going to have them tell us who they are. So let's just get right into it. How about you guys just introduce yourselves, where you serve and what your role is with MAF?
Sure. Thanks, Lem. And we're really glad to be here. So thanks again for the invitation. My name is Stephen Hale. Ruth, my wife, we have 3 children, Malachi, Kaylee, and Evie. Malachi is what?
9
now. Kaylee is 7. Evie is 4 and 1 on the way.
Wow.
Right here. And we serve in Kinshasa, Western Democratic Republic of Congo. We are the program directors there. We've been on the field now for almost 8 years. With MAF 10 years altogether.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's incredible. And from what I understand, this isn't your first time in Africa, is when you joined MAF.
That would be true.
Yeah.
Ruth, how long have you been in Africa?
Well, it's difficult to actually have a number, but my parents were missionaries in West Africa, and I was actually born in Ghana. And we lived in Ghana and Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso. So more of my life has been spent in Africa than it has been spent in the U.S.
Yeah. So Ruth has me beat by about 4 years. Since she was born in Ghana, I can't claim that. I was born in Kentucky, like I said earlier. Yay!
Hey. Our Kentucky listeners, he didn't mean that.
I know it's a great place. I just have never been back since I was born.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, totally.
No, we moved overseas when I was 4 years old, and then my parents went to language school first in France, and then down to Benin, formerly Dahomey. It was one of the only communist countries in Western Africa, believe it or not. Anyway, just interesting factoid for everybody listening. We moved down there and lived there for 9 years, and then moved to Burkina Faso after that. Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso.
Wow. Those are mouthfuls of names, which I have experienced in being on this podcast and going to places like Lesotho when they give us their words in their languages that mean, a 2-syllable word. You guys can watch that episode and figure out what that all means. But I wanted to, so you guys are both like third culture kids, like essentially born and raised overseas.
Essentially. I'll take it. It's good.
What was that like for you guys? I mean, Ruth, how about you start? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I have really great memories of growing up overseas. So the place we lived first was a village, like in the far northern part of Ghana called Naleriku. And so, I mean, I grew up very free to just run around and ride my bike. And I mean, I just remember being very free, like not hemmed in by walls or fences or, streets. And it was wonderful. And that is, we moved away from Ghana when I was 10, but I still call Ghana my heart country because it's still where my heart is. And like, if I'm going to choose a country to cheer for in like the World Cup, for example, like Ghana's my first choice.
Or the Olympics, right?
Or the Olympics, yes. Any of those kind of sporting things.
Yeah,
Ghana's my first choice.
Yeah.
And then the benefit of growing up in several countries is like once Ghana is out, then I can go to the next country that, I've lived in or someone else in my family has lived in. And so I always have somebody to cheer for. But after that, I mean, we lived in Senegal, which was amazing because it has an amazing beach. And again, like we could, as teenagers anyway, we were there for school as teenagers. We could like hop in a taxi and like go to the beach and spend like not the whole weekend, but like, all day Saturday there. And just having a real appreciation for that aspect of just like freedom and what we could do. And the really amazing experiences that we had, like going to the beach every weekend and other interesting trips. And I mean, there are aspects that are hard too, like, if you're familiar at all with like TCKs or TCK literature, like your identity is kind of just weird because you don't like like clearly I'm not African, but I've spent most of my time in Africa.
Yeah.
But I don't really quite fit in there, and I don't really quite fit in America because that's not like my experience. And so just navigating that is kind of messy as a teenager.
Sure.
But here I am on the other side raising my own kids as TCKs.
Yeah.
So somehow I made it.
Okay. I'm going to pry a little bit just because you brought it up, you know, because you seem like a very well-adjusted adult.
Thank you. I project it well.
Oh man,
she does well in public.
But that I mean, that is a complexity, and I'm sure Stephen, you resonate with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I guess my question is, you know, in those times where it was difficult to find an identity, was there ever anything that you actually did place your identity in that helped you kind of get through that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think at the heart of it, your identity has to come from Christ, right? No matter who you are or where you come from, like everything else is secondary, and your identity being fully and wholly grounded in being a child of God and saved by grace through faith, and that being at the core of your identity, I think for anybody,
sure,
TCK or not, like that really has to be your bedrock. And I'm actually, am I a second generation TCK? And then our kids are third generation TCK. So my dad is a missionary kid also. Okay. So his grandparents are missionaries. And you know, I mean, I just wish they could like give me their formula, because they did something right in raising. I have two sisters, and we're all well adjusted, more or less. But I think that first thing, like the key of your identity and who you are being just found in Christ, has to be the bedrock of
And is that
everything,
and something that you learned when you were in high school, or is that something that maybe came later through the experiences that maybe of dealing? I mean, these are really hard. Hard hitting questions.
But I mean, I think it's like a process of. I mean, I guess I don't know if you could say part of the process of your sanctification, but like even in the car today, we were talking about still kind of like feeling weird in America, and that there have been different parts of my life where I've like embraced the like I'm an MK and I identify with being more of an African, or you kind of set that aside for the times that we've lived for more significant periods of time in America and been like, well, I'm going to like close off that half of my brain and like be an American for this, period of time. And being much more comfortable now, like being both things and having both things be true, and just like, I'm okay, like not fitting in one place or the other. Like that's just the reality. And so like, sure, let's go for it.
Yeah.
Well, and because like, because your identity is in Christ, whether
the other stuff is
you're operating on the American half of your brain or the African half of your brain, or they finally reach this like point of, I don't know, perfect harmony, even if that didn't happen, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's all right. It's okay to feel uncomfortable, to feel a little bit out of place, because we're right where we need to be if we're in Christ and if you're confident in that identity.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, was that some things that you had to work through as well, Stephen?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, everything that Ruth described, I think is very much my own experience. As a teenager, I remember coming back to the U.S. and talking with one of my friends. We had just been evacuated from Ivory Coast, Civil War, lots of fighting. Yeah. I mean, we were kind of caught in the middle of it. There were, lots of gunfire, lots of tracers, lots of, it was an intense period of time, an intense experience that we lived through. And I'm talking to some of my high school friends at a youth group, right, with the youth group leader guy there, and they would just want to hear my story, right? So I'm sharing my story, and I'll never forget it, because the youth group leader's like nodding his head, and he's like, "Yeah, I understand." And I was like, "Really? Do you?" No. I was like, and so that was kind of, you never really felt like anybody understood you or really knew what you had been through. And I was like, really, like, what was the last, like, war you lived through? I don't know.
Yeah, totally.
But nevertheless, so I think that actually that very same furlough, I would have been 15 at the time. That was when the Lord really started to convict my own heart of sin. I had given my life to the Lord at a very young age already. But that was that particular season in life was when the Lord convicted me of my own sin, and that I needed to wholly rely on him, for every aspect of my life. It wasn't just about my salvation, but it was about how to live, everyday life in a way that is pleasing and honoring to him. And that includes being okay with who I am and my background, and whether I'm African or American or third culture kid or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, other than the hard stuff, Ruth talked about some of the really fun stuff, and she, that was like the first thing she went to when she talked about her time overseas as a missionary kid or a third culture kid.
Yeah.
Which I love, because that's kind of where I go to when I think about my time as an MK. Was that like that for you too, Stephen? Did you have some really great childhood overseas?
Man, yeah, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I was very, very similar to Ruth. We lived in a small village/town. I could ride my bike for miles. I had group of friends, and we would just go out and hunt lizards and birds and go get lost in the woods or whatever. It was great. It was like every little boy's dream, right? In that respect. And so many unique experiences. And I don't think my parents really knew how far I rode my bike away from home. Like, I ended up in several villages away from the house, and I was having meals with like random families in their huts and stuff. Like, I don't know if my parents knew where I was, but I look back at those times and I'm like, wow, that was super special. And I don't know, in today's world, I think, man, I wouldn't let my kid disappear like that. Frankly.
Oh, sure.
I don't know. What do you think? Are your kids too?
Well, we don't live in a small village. We live in a huge city of 17 million people. So it's a very different context. But I don't know. I haven't had to consider that question.
I would, I look back at our childhood, especially the countries where we grew up: Benin, Burkina Faso, even Ivory Coast, Senegal to a lesser extent, but a lot of those countries have kind of fallen apart, with Islamic jihadism and other extremist type activity, and you literally can't just go out the way you used to. We used to go out to the game parks and drive around, or we used to drive from Burkina Faso all the way down to Ivory Coast. So that takes you down into the northern part of Ghana and then across. It's like a 14, 15-hour drive. You can't do that anymore because of bandits on the road or militant groups. And that's really sad. And it makes me feel like, to one extent, that like my childhood is kind of lost, right? Like you can't go back to those places. Yeah. Like some of my favorite places as a kid, I'll never be able to go back to. Yeah. Unless something drastically changes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's true. And, as we grow up and we look back on our childhoods and the fond memories we have of it, and then we get married, we have kids, we do want our kids to experience some of that same magical childhood that we have, no matter where you live. And I can see how that can be kind of painful to know that I really can't give them that same experience. Even though we've kind of moved overseas and done this missionary thing, it's very different. And so
it does bring me a lot of joy to see our son with his slingshots now running around the yard hunting lizards. Oh my God.
Ruth, I saw that eye roll. It's
amazing.
They came to me. Okay, so I do not do lizards, which is very strange living in Africa. I totally get it. I understand. I am afraid of them. Don't want them in my house. Don't really love having them running around the yard because I never know when they're going to jump out at me. So Malachi was given slingshots for his birthday, and he and his friends were playing, and they come to me and they're like, "Hey Mom, can we shoot birds?" I was like, "No." And Malachi's like, "How about lizards?" I was like, "Lizards are fine. Go hunt the
now
lizards."
You're talking.
Kill all the lizards.
Okay, man, this is a crazy tangent. I didn't expect us to like do such a deep dive into like your guys' childhoods, but this is actually really fun.
Yeah.
I did want to ask though, like, were you guys pretty aware of like your parents' like work as missionaries there? And I asked that because I'm wondering, like, did living in a Christian home as missionaries overseas, like, did that help shape kind of what you wanted to do as you grew up?
You want to tackle that first?
Yes. So I think like growing up overseas and growing up as missionaries, like just gives you a much wider view of the world than maybe is like natural when you grow up in one spot. And so, I mean, Africa has always had and will always have, a very special place in my heart. And like, I love it. For me, like specifically with missions, I had like a very distinct, like God speaking to me when I think I was around like 11. We were like at a missions conference and they did it's an altar call, but sort of more focused towards like, is God calling you into missions or ministry? And like, I mean, it's one of the times in my life where I've like basically heard the audible call, like voice of the Lord speaking to me, like, yes, that is you. Wow. And so like from that point on, like I knew like, well, okay, this is what the Lord has for me at some point later in my life. I didn't know when or in what fashion. There's so many different ways to do missions. But like, as I grew in my faith and my knowledge of the world, my heart was especially for the places where there is little to no witness, because those places still exist in the world, and it's just kind of mind blowing. Yeah, after so many years of missions and of the Word of God going out, that there are still those places that exist. And so that's kind of where then Stephen's love of aviation and my specific call to missions kind of intersect.
Okay.
So I'll like let you tell your side now.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, certainly growing up in a Christian home, but I mean, a missional home, absolutely influenced my perspective on missions and wanting to come back into missions. Yeah. My parents were ethnomusicologists, which is a really big word for saying like they studied local music to write worship primarily in local traditional forms, right? So really... instead of coming in with Western hymns or choruses, to actually learn, well, how are people singing and writing music where they are, and how can we help them learn how to do that? Yeah. I love that. It's really fascinating work. And man, as a kid, I didn't appreciate it enough. Like in hindsight, I find it just absolutely amazing, the work that they did. But as such, like we had worship groups in our home, every week, which ultimately led to churches being planted. And that left a really strong mark on my life, right? To see just this, what started out as a small, very kind of technical exercise. So we're going to take music and we're going to learn we're going to take local music, we're going to study it, and then we're going to write worship music out of it. And that became a worship group, a study group, and then ultimately a church, and then multiple churches, right? Wow. And that's really neat. Phenomenal. Yeah. That God would use it in that way. And I can't say that I have not heard, I did not hear the audible voice of God in the way that Ruth did, which is just amazing. Every time she tells the story, I get goosebumps. But I had that kind of desire to be involved in missions again at some point in my life. And then how exactly did it happen? We were on furlough, the same one I had referenced earlier, actually, after the evacuation and kind of feeling disconnected or whatever, this dissonance with American culture and the youth group I was in, and the Lord convicting me of sin, all of that happening at the same time. I was homeschooled to finish that year while we were in the States. And my dad asked me he's like, you need to do something to get out of the house, for one. Because I had kind of chosen the withdraw. I'm an introvert as it is, so I was just totally content to like not engage with the United States and stay in my room. So he's like, no, you got to get out of the house. And what do you think? Would you like to go and take a flight lesson? I don't really know where that came from.
It's like the first thing that every dad suggests, right? To get you out of the house.
Okay. Sure. So we go and found a flight school outside of Atlanta, Georgia. That's where we were furloughing at the time, and did the flight lesson. It was absolutely amazing. So such a cool experience. And then get back on the ground. My dad says, "So, what do you think, Stephen? Did you like it? Did you have fun?" I'm like, "Yeah, it was awesome." He's like, "Do you want to keep doing lessons? Like, while we're here anyway, while we're in the States?" Yeah, Dad, that would be awesome. He's like, good. So you can go get a job and then you can start paying for some flight lessons. I'm like,
I was wondering, there's got to be a catch to this. No dad's like this stoked about.
So that very much worked. So he got me out of the house. I got a job at a Chick-fil-A. And as another like miracle that they would hire this, 15-year-old guy from Africa that they didn't even know, and helped pay for some flight lessons. And that then going back to Africa, right after that. So that was my sophomore year of high school. We went back to Africa, Dakar, Senegal, new boarding school. The old boarding school was shut down after the war. And it was like God turned on the light bulb in my head or in my heart rather. I had known missionary kids that were like the children of missionary pilots, but I never really connected like what they were doing with what their parents were doing. Yeah. Right. But now I had a little bit of this aviation background, and then I was meeting again missionary kids that were the children of missionary pilots. Yeah. I was like, oh, so you can use aviation to get the gospel out, and it was like, yes, that's what God wants me to do. And like from that point forward, it's just been full steam ahead in that direction, like without looking back really. Yeah.
So I think too, that just like the example of our parents and their like full-hearted like service to the Lord and whatever he asked them to do and wherever he asked them to go, like the impact of that in our lives. I mean, I don't even know, like, I don't think I really quite have the words to like state the strength of that impact in our lives. This is when like you watch your parents do that. Yeah. And, live surrendered to the Lord. Like it's almost like that's kind of like, okay, like that's what you do. Like that God is worthy of your ultimate surrender in all of your life. And so, if he asks you to go, live in Kinshasa, then like, that's what you do. If he asks you to stay in America and, be a pilot or like whatever, like that's what you do. Like whatever he calls you to, you surrender your life and you do it.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point to make though, that it has to be a calling, right? That God has to call you to that. And he's calling us to do all sorts of different things. Right. And it's more the practice of being open to obeying that call.
And I think sometimes for like TCKs, the call to stay is much harder than the call to go.
Oh yeah.
And
well, it's everything they know, right? Is to go and not to stay. And so when you get that call to stay, it's like, is this really?
Are you sure, God? Like, wouldn't I be better somewhere else? Yeah.
Yeah. Right. But on the flip side, those who, maybe have grown up, born and raised in the United States or something, and they get that call to go overseas and, sacrifice a life in the States. It's like, is that really what you want me to do? And kind of. Yeah.
And that's one of the things I love too about like, just about God is he uses so many different like paths and means and ways. And I love hearing other people's stories because they're going to be so different from my own, but like God is working in everyone's lives to bring about his good purposes. Yeah. And so like, yes, like my mom grew up in a small town in the panhandle of Texas. and I don't think she left Texas until maybe college. I'll have to confirm that with her. But he called her to missions, and she went and moved to Africa, which was just so foreign to like her and her life and background. And so anyway,
wow.
Sounds like my dad, right? Who's like from small town Georgia and ends up in the middle of Africa, And my parents actually prayed to not go to Africa. Yeah, I mean, that's just interesting. When they're like, okay, well, they knew God was calling them to missions, and they're like, we accept, and then they got their assignment, which was, I don't know how it worked necessarily in their organization, but the assignment was to go to this country called Benin. And so they pulled out, there was a time before the internet when you had like atlases. Right?
Yes.
So they had to open the atlas and
let me Google that word.
It's like a big map, right? So they're looking in there, and they looked all over South America. They looked all over Asia. They like couldn't find Benin anywhere, and they're like, well, we asked God not to go to Africa, so it's not going to be there, right? And so they finally look in Africa, and there it was, Benin. But anyway, I have a feeling like, I mean, there's lots of stories like that, right? Where be careful what you ask God for, and also be careful what you
tell him you
don't want to do. Because
so speaking of paths, so I mean, you guys were referencing that like you were like Ruth, you were going down one path, and and Stephen, you're going down another path, and there was maybe some intersection that happened. Like where was that intersection for you two?
How would you answer that, Ruth? I mean,
well, I'd start at the beginning. We met at boarding school in 8th grade. I'm going to give the short version.
Were you guys part of the same mission as well?
Yes.
You were.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we met at boarding school in 8th grade, and then we're really good friends for several years. We finally started dating our senior year of high school.
Oh, Stephen, why did it take you 5 years to ask her out?
This is the long version.
Now you're getting into the long version. Oh, trust me, I tried. I tried to date her sooner. Okay, so I'll just leave it there.
Okay, cool.
No, it's not fair. We disagree on this, or I don't know. Let's say we disagree. But Stephen asked me to the Valentine's banquet our freshman year of high school.
And like, what else could that mean?
Except everyone asks somebody to the Valentine's banquet. I mean, you went with friends. You went as a group. Anyway.
You ask your crush to the Valentine's banquet.
Maybe
speaking.
the guys understood it differently than the girls, but regardless.
That's okay.
Yes.
We went together.
Do we have any popcorn? Yeah. I need something for the show. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. So I could throw. I don't feel thrown under the bus, but I could throw you under the bus
please
too.
don't.
Because then
no, we can. That's why I said we're going to leave it right there. That's good. We got married in the end.
I regret asking the question. I was just trying to be playful, but man, I really.
Well, we've told this story several times, and this always happens. Because the rest of the story is then like by the end of our junior year of high school, like it was very evident to everybody that Stephen and Ruth liked each other. We spent like tons of time together. But then like for the first 4 months of our senior year of high school, we like had a conversation like every month where Stephen was basically like, I really like you, but I don't think we should date. And I'd be like, okay, cool, let's be friends. And then like next month, I really like you, but I don't think we should date. Yes.
This is the DTR, the define the
DTR.
Yes.
Define the
Multiple
relationship.
DTRs.
Multiple
Yeah,
DTRs.
usually you only have one of those, Stephen.
Yeah.
The funniest thing is, one of the funniest, two funny things actually that come to mind. One is that he and two other friends made a pact their senior year. They were not going to date. And then by the end of the year, all three of them had girlfriends.
Yeah.
They had another friend who said, I'm going to get a girlfriend this year. He did not ever get a girlfriend that year. The other funny thing was that another one of our friends, once we did finally start dating, when Stephen told him, he was like, if that's true, I'm going to eat dirt. And then did you call me over?
I called you over and I'm like, Ruth,
hey,
come here. He doesn't think we're dating.
I was like, yeah. And he was like, oh, he literally picked up a handful of sand and ate it, which is really gross.
Oh,
yes.
Well, I mean, he's a man of his word.
He's a man of his word. Yeah.
Anyway.
It's very biblical,
We also had a friend in 8th grade, Jeremy Bill.
That's
Jeremy,
true.
shout out to Jeremy if you're watching this. I'll send you the link. He told us in 8th grade that we were going to get married.
And here we are. That's true. I forgot about that.
Dude.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
what were we talking about? I don't know.
Intersecting.
Yes.
I think even when we started dating, we didn't necessarily have this big conversation at that point that we're both interested in missions and, this is where we're going. But, by the end of that year, we were going our separate ways to universities. I went to Texas A&M, and Stephen went to Florida to Embry-Riddle. And so we did have a big conversation at that point, what is going to happen?
Yep.
Ultimately, we continued dated all through college. But at that point, we both clearly understood that each other were interested in missions. Stephen was obviously following the aviation pathway with going to Embry-Riddle. Mm-hmm. My degree is actually in international studies because I wanted to move back overseas. That made a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yep.
Another funny story there. So she got a minor in French. Okay.
Oh.
I did not know this until we get to French language school and we're testing in,
Yeah.
And I grew up speaking French in West Africa. I never took a French class ever. I just, street French. Would talk to my friends and stuff like that. So I knew zero grammar, zero writing, pretty bad, but I could talk, right? So I'm thinking I'm going to test in pretty high or at least, not at the beginner level or whatever.
Yeah.
And here comes Ruth and she tests in at the highest possible level. And I'm like, whoa, you don't even speak French, maybe a little bit. And she's like, no, I minored in French in college. I have a whole degree in French.
I don't know how you missed it.
I missed that somewhere along the way. But anyway, if you need, she's a French expert. I'm just saying that. Yes, you are. Yes.
I'm not an expert.
I'm a minor,
but
so.
It is a beautiful language.
It is.
I just thought that was funny that somehow you got all through college and I had no idea.
That's okay. So that's okay. And clearly you guys got married and I wanted to ask, so was Mission Aviation Fellowship the organization you guys were this is the one? Or did you guys, were you being courted by other organizations?
No.
We were not being courted.
No, but we had not actually made up our minds or felt called to a particular organization. We knew that we wanted to serve through Mission Aviation somewhere, but we also didn't have a particular timeline in mind. I even thought at one point that maybe I would fly for the airlines or do the Air Force or, something in between.
Yeah.
But as it played out, I finished at Embry-Riddle, and then still had to do airframe and power plant. And these are just general requirements for most organizations. Sure. So we knew how to get the licenses and ratings, the airframe and power plant certification, and then some Bible school. So I thought we'll just go after those things regardless of what organization we go for or go with. And then at one point, I forget when or how exactly, we kind of looked down and we're like, all this stuff is kind of almost done. We should start reaching out to a couple organizations. Yeah. And we reached out to MAF and we knew MAF growing up. I mean, we had MAF kids that were in our class at boarding school.
I was evacuated on an MAF airplane.
Right. Oh,
yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
We need to go into that.
So
later.
It was at least somewhat familiar to us. And then I think once we started the conversations with MAF, it was just very affirming that this is where the Lord wants us.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, two things that I remember about that is one, my desire to be a part of reaching the unreached places, which I forget what MAF's mission and vision statement was at that point, but there was something about that.
Something about isolated people.
Yes, something about isolated people. But then also, one of the things I remember is just MAF's reputation for excellence and being really good and careful pilots and having a really good and careful operation. And especially as the wife of a pilot, I care about that a lot. And so that was also yes, we want to be a part of an organization that cares about being excellent and doing things well and doing things carefully. So those are two things that I remember about that.
Just dusting the cobwebs off my old ministry partnership trainings, sharing the love of Jesus Christ through aviation and technology so that isolated people might be spiritually and physically transformed. Was that the old?
Something
I think
like
that was the old.
That was the old one.
Old one.
Yeah.
It's more or less that, except condensed.
Now it's condensed.
Fewer words.
Fewer words. I was just thinking back to, man, we had that dialed in when we were going through ministry partnership.
So it was reaching isolated people and doing it with excellent care. They were the two things for you, Ruth. Was that the same for you too, Stephen, or was there something else too?
Yeah, certainly reaching the isolated. I think one of having lived in West Africa and seen the immense physical needs that were there, and understanding how aviation can be a part of meeting those needs, right? But in Jesus' name was what really attracted me to that.
Okay. Yeah.
And that
totally.
And that mission aviation fellowship was just so outrightly, overtly Christ-centered in how they go about their business of bringing help, hope, and healing to people in Jesus' name. Anyway, that's what attracted me to MAF, and also definitely the standard. I appreciate what Ruth is saying, like the care for the pilots. The high standard that MAF exhibits at a professional level. Yeah. Like I wanted to be a part of that as a pilot for sure.
Cool. That's awesome. All right. So we're going to fast forward now to let's do present day stuff.
Yeah,
sure. You guys are in Kinshasa in the western parts of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And you mentioned that you guys are program directors or what's the program look like today and the kind of things that you guys do and the people that you serve, what does it look like?
Oh, wow. Good question. Our program is awesome. We have just going to say that we currently have 8 career families there. And then we've got 27 national staff as a part of that team. It is just a wonderful group of people that God has brought together to serve him in Kinshasa. And we're blessed to work alongside them every day. Our ministry there is, we probably touch on all the different, short-term outcomes that MAF talks about, whether it's searching for new disciples, because we've got people like Kids Action Network that are going out and really reaching the next generation of kids. We have supporting the national church. We've got ministries that we're partnering with to help do pastoral training, that's part of, we could talk a lot about that. That's one of the things we're most excited about. But then we also have a lot of core needs kind of ministry happening, vaccine runs, medevacs, hospital support at the Vanga Hospital and other clinics in the area. And then stewarding creation is another one where we're working with researchers, and we're even working with a group now, a Christian man that is running an organization out of Sweden that is like a carbon credits kind of organization, right? So you can offset your pollution in Europe by planting trees in Congo. But hey, at least they're planting trees in Congo, and we get to be a part of it, which is really exciting.
That's awesome.
There's and then we love to pour into our national staff, like doing the training and building up of that group of people, and to watch them really take on more and more responsibility on the program. That's been exciting in the last few years to see that happen. Anyway, that's it in a nutshell. What else do you want to know?
Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's awesome. Well, for you, Ruth, what's it look like?
Well, I'll just tag on, like, Congo is such a huge country, but with like almost no infrastructure or like working infrastructure aside from, barges on the river. And so to move people and stuff, cargo around is just really hard. And so aviation continues to be necessary, and especially for a lot of the partners that we work with, like they're not going to get to the places they need to go without the airplane. And you know, I mean, that's just pretty amazing how the Lord uses an airplane.
Right.
You know?
No, that's, yeah. I mean, since joining MAF, for me, it's amazing to see just all the various different ways that the airplane makes a huge impact in these places. It's amazing. So, and it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I never thought about that, but then you think about it and it's like, it totally makes sense why people love the airplane out here. So yeah, that's awesome. And I was gonna say like the things that you guys are doing. What I love about like the idea of those like short-term outcomes. It's more of like these things are like internal like organizational terms, right?
Sure.
It's what I love about it is that you're taking the people of like who are in this organization, but we're like focusing them to gaze outward to the things that are around them, right? The people, and how can we help these people in the ways that they need? Like how can we meet their needs? Like learn their needs and meet their needs. And even down to like the stewarding the creation thing, which I think I just love that they added that in there, because it's something that God has called us to do as his creation, as image bearers of who he is. It's like, take care of what I made. So but it's not necessarily something that you naturally would think about with in mission aviation organization. But
I think one of the key, ideas that really resonated with me with the thinking through those short-term outcomes and is that, it's really tempting to try to define what we do as MAF by who's on the airplane, right? Like, am I flying missionaries? Am I flying doctors? Am I flying medicine? Am I flying researchers, right? And then they become, I assume because they're the ones that are in the airplane, that they're the ones that are benefiting from MAF being there. And I don't know exactly when this shift happened in my understanding, but the real beneficiaries of our work are not the people that are on the airplane. It's the people that those people are interacting with, right? And all of a sudden your excitement just, it just goes off the charts when you're like, this flight is not about the 9 people that are in the seats here. It's about the 10,000 that they're going to interact with on the ground in whatever village it's at or whatever. Or the fact that Kennedy with Kids Action Network can meet with, one single church in the middle in Nyoki, right? Which is where you went, and have an impact across multiple villages and multiple churches. And he'll send reports back and say, because these 4 churches were reached, we're estimating that's about 3,000 to 4,000 children that are going to, receive, doctrinally sound Sunday school now in the next year or whatever. I mean, that's mind blowing. Anyway, and has really helped transform my idea of what we're a part of.
No, that's great. Okay, I wanted to shift a little bit because I wanted to bring this idea of like a full circle in this conversation, because you guys grew up overseas and you kind of had like experiences with MAF as children, and you pursued ministry overseas, and then found yourselves as MAF missionaries overseas in the same continent that you're in. And you guys were telling me before we started recording how some of that like full circle-ness was coming about. And Ruth, you kind of mentioned it a little bit with being evacuated as an MK through an MAF plane, but like maybe like bring it back as an adult now.
Yeah, well, so I was evacuated from, it was not an evacuation under duress or anything. It was something pretty low key, actually.
Downplaying
different evacuation.
There were 2.
There were multiple.
The first one, just the school decided to close early because of some like demonstrations and stuff in the town. And so that was when MAF was still in Mali. The Mali program sent an airplane down to pick up some of us who needed to go like that direction, like north. And then what's that direction? West. Anyway, so I was evacuated in an MAF airplane. But then once we got to Kinshasa, we discovered that same airplane, which airplane?
Huh? It was a 206. It was, the tail number's different. It was 9 Quebec Charlie Mike Romeo.
Anyway, was there in Kinshasa, which was just this like, I mean, it's such like a random thing, but it's so like, oh, that's really cool.
No, that is cool. Yeah. Like, I think that's a really neat.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know if it's necessarily an affirmation that you're in the right place or anything, but it's just like a really cool connection, right?
Yeah.
Like running into an old like MK friend, you know.
Oh yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, I know you from my past, and it's
and Kinshasa has been a city of connections for us or since we got there. I mean, we have encountered missionaries that we knew growing up that are now serving in Kinshasa. Like, we had no idea they were there, and yet here they are. Cool. And some of those folks are like family to us, and so that's been a special blessing. And I think that is affirming for us in many ways.
Well, Stephen, I know that, I mean, we've written about this, I think, in like flight watches and stuff. But like, you were able to even fly your own parent in her ministry work, right?
Yeah.
You want to say something about that?
Completely mind blowing, right? Like, I never would have imagined that in a million years.
Yeah.
And our parents were so supportive. Which we don't take for granted, right? I mean, it's hard. It is really hard for families to let their children go overseas and serve, right? And so we just really cherish the support that we have from our family, that they're so encouraging of us to even want to be overseas and to serve in missions in a place like Congo, for one, and all through flight training and preparing to go and all this kind of stuff. Like, my mom was probably my number one champion, right? To
that's awesome.
Help me finish all that was needed. In any case, then not even a year, like a few months after we landed in Congo, I think it was.
She came for her first trip, like just a few months after we moved to Congo, but she took the position, I think, while we were in France.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, my mom is also working in Congo like 2 or 3 times a year. And then, and I guess, I don't know, it just worked out that at a particular point, I was able to actually fly with her, like, because her organization uses MAF, right? So I was actually able to be the pilot that was flying my mom into this remote village in northern Congo to go do some medical work up in northwest Congo. So like, no, just nothing. Words can't really describe what that was like. And it really was God's hand in bringing that about. And we just look back at all of that and all the things that God had done in our lives previously up to that moment and go like, humans can't plan that kind of thing. Like, we couldn't have planned this if we'd wanted to. So we just give God the glory for it. And
amen. That's so
thanks,
cool. I love that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so there is another thing I wanted to ask you guys about, like, and again, you guys mentioned this, touched on it too, because kind of now being parents yourselves, raising third culture kids in an overseas context. And like, man, I just wish, I think it was you, Ruth, that said this. I wish I could just tap into the wisdom of my parents, because
I mean, we do tap into that wisdom. We ask lots of questions. I just wish they like give me their like formula.
Yeah, totally. I guess my question would be, how has it been 9 years going, raising your children in Kinshasa, and like, what are your hopes going forward, as you even expect another one?
I think that question was directed to you.
How has it been? I mean, I think on the one hand, there's a certain ease and the shared experience of like I grew up as a TCK. My kids are TCKs. So there's a lot of what they are experiencing and will experience that I understand and can draw on my own experiences. But at the same time, like I know the painful things and the hard things, and no one ever wants to see their children go through painful and hard things, even though like in my own life, those are the times the Lord has worked the most in my heart. And so I think for our kids, I would just hope that they grow up to be compassionate and gracious with a wide view of the world and a big view of God. with a deep love for Africa, which they at least have a deep love for Congo. I mean, Malachi has already said he never wants to leave, which that's great. I mean, that's wonderful to hear, because it's not the case for all kids growing up overseas. And yeah, with lots of really interesting and fun experiences to draw on, and also like strange experiences. Like, I don't know, trying to think of an interesting, strange experience our kids have experienced.
Oh, I mean, it's funny. They're very accustomed to like the power going out and stuff, because we'll go days without power. Sometimes we were getting ready to come here, and you overheard Kaylee talking about like people complaining about the power being off in the United States. Do you remember that?
No, I actually think that was a different, I think it was a conversation with like one of their friends about that particular thing. But no, I do remember them talking about like traffic jams. So traffic in Kinshasa is, is
next level.
It's interesting. It took me an hour and 45 minutes to get to my last doctor's appointment, which is not that far away. It's just that traffic is just very slow and just, crazy. I mean, we were stopped at a light today, and we're in our lane, of course, and the other car's in its lane. And I was like, I think you could fit a whole car in between us, and there's nobody there. Whereas in Kinshasa, like every little inch, centimeter, millimeter is like full.
Quite literally. You're not even exaggerating.
And
that's the crazy part.
They were like, we'll ask people, like talking about, meeting people here. We'll ask them like, well, it's the longest traffic jam you've ever been in. And, whatever their answer is, I'm like, well, we've been in, 2 or 3 hour. You just learn early to like pack water and snacks wherever you go, because you might be stuck for a while.
It's just funny that our children are already like imagining having this conversation with people about how bad the traffic is in Congo and bragging about it. Like, it's like, okay. I don't know. They've had some. They've also been able to travel the world. I mean, to an extent, right? Even at this young age, like we've been able to visit South Africa and France, and it's just, for me, I think that's really special for them to, like you said, to have that big picture of God's world and their place in it. And we pray that they would. Also, have a heart for Africa, and have a heart for the world as well. Yeah,
that's great. Did we miss anything? Is there anything you guys want to mention that we missed?
I don't think so.
I don't know. I think it's been good conversation, and
it's been great.
There's just one more thing about our dating relationship.
Oh yeah, should we go back to that? I think we should totally do that. So, how many DTRs did you guys have again?
I don't know. Too many.
Yeah.
Too many, right?
The important things, we're here now.
Yeah.
We actually celebrate our 15-year anniversary this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, there you go.
Okay.
That's awesome.
We're on our way.
Yeah. Well, my wife loves to tell people about how we first met and our first date and all the story. I have to actually like physically leave the room because it does paint me in a bad light. Like I am a doofus in the dating world. It's pretty great. So I totally get it. Yeah. But thanks guys for being here. It's been such a pleasure. It really has.
It's our pleasure too. It's been fun to chat.
Yeah. Thank you, Lem.
Yeah, appreciate of course. Well, everyone, I hope you guys enjoyed that. And if you have any thoughts or comments, leave those in the comment section below, or you can email us at podcast@maf.org. And you can always go to maf.org/podcast if you want to watch more episodes. So, but till then, we'll see you guys next month. And look up Stephen and Ruth Hale on their website and get to know them a little bit more. They're great. So
thanks.
All right, see you guys.
See you next
time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye for now.